way you think is quietly shaping your entire life. And here's the part no one tells you. You can say everything right, do everything right, and still be ignored. You've probably felt that before. You explain something clearly, and people talk over you. You try to make a point, and somehow lose the room. You put in effort, but it doesn't translate into respect. Not in an obvious way. Not in a way you can point to and say, that's the problem. Just a subtle feeling that something is off, that no matter how much you do, it never quite lands the way you expect. There was a time I lived in that exact space. I thought the solution was simple. Be better, do more, improve my communication. So I did. I spoke more clearly. I tried to be more confident. I paid attention to how I presented myself. But the result didn't change in the way I thought it would. If anything, it made me feel more frustrated, because now I was doing everything right and still not getting the outcome I expected. And that's when something started to shift. Not all at once, not in some dramatic moment, but slowly, through patterns I began to notice. The same situations, repeating, the same reactions, showing up again and again, the same feeling of losing control, in moments that mattered, and eventually I had to face something uncomfortable. It wasn't my actions that were limiting me. It was the way I was thinking, before I even acted. Because thinking isn't just something that stays in your head, it leaks into everything, into your tone, your timing, the way you respond under pressure, the way you carry yourself when things don't go your way. Mars and people pick up on that, instantly, not consciously, but clearly. That's why two people can say the exact same words and be received completely differently. That's why one person walks into a room and is respected, while another has to fight to be heard. The difference isn't always visible, but it's always there. High-value people understand this, whether they can explain it or not. They don't rely on saying more. They don't rush to react. They don't feel the need to prove something in every moment. There's a pause in the way they think, a kind of distance that gives them control. And that control changes everything. Because when you stop reacting automatically, you start choosing your responses. When you stop chasing approval, you stop giving away your power. When you stop trying to be understood, you start becoming someone people naturally pay attention to. That's the shift. And once you see it, you can't go back to thinking the same way. You start noticing it everywhere, in conversations, in conflicts, in the small moments where people either gain respect or lose it without realizing why. And the most interesting part is this. Nothing on the outside has to change first, not your job, not your environment, not the people around you. The shift starts internally, in how you interpret what's happening, in what you choose to focus on, in the meaning you assign to every situation. That's where the real power is. In this audiobook, we're going to break that down step by step, not in a theoretical way, but in a way you'll recognize in your own life, almost immediately. You'll start to see the patterns behind your reactions, the habits in your thinking that quietly shape how others see you. And more importantly, you'll understand how to change them, because once your thinking changes, you don't just communicate differently. You don't just act differently. You become someone people feel differently about before you even say a word. Chapter 1. The invisible difference you can't see. There's a moment you've probably experienced, but never fully understood. You say something that makes sense. You've thought it through. You're not guessing. You're not unsure. And yet, it doesn't land. Not the way you expected. Not with the weight you felt behind it. The conversation moves on too quickly. Someone interrupts. Or worse, people acknowledge you but don't really listen. And nothing about that moment feels dramatic enough to question. But it stays with you, because deep down, it doesn't feel random. It feels like something is slightly off, and you can't quite explain what it is. For a long time, I thought the answer was simple. Say things better, be more confident, communicate more clearly. So I focused on that. I paid attention to how I spoke, and I tried to sound more certain. I made sure my points were structured, logical, easy to follow. But something didn't change. The reaction I got from people still felt inconsistent. Sometimes I was heard, other times I wasn't. And the frustrating part was, I couldn't predict which version I was going to get. That's when I started noticing something uncomfortable. There were people who didn't seem to try as hard. They didn't say more than necessary. They didn't explain every detail. They didn't rush to fill silence. But when they spoke, people paid attention, not in an obvious dramatic way, just a subtle shift. The room slowed down. The conversation adjusted. The energy moved, slightly but noticeably. And that difference was impossible to ignore, because it had nothing to do with effort. If anything, they were doing less. So the question changed. It stopped being, what should I say to get better results? And became, what is happening before they even speak that makes people respond differently? That's where everything starts to become clear, because the real difference isn't in communication. It's in thinking. More specifically, it's in the state of mind you bring into a situation before anything happens. When your thinking is unstable, your behavior becomes reactive. You speak too quickly. You adjust your tone based on how others respond. You explain more than necessary just to make sure you're understood. Not because you lack intelligence, but because part of your attention is focused on how you're being perceived, and that changes the way you show up. It creates small signals, and signals that say, I need this to go well. I need to be understood. I need to be seen a certain way. Again, nothing obvious, but enough for people to feel it. And the moment they feel that, the dynamic shifts. Not dramatically, just enough that you're no longer in control of how the interaction unfolds. I realized this in a moment that stayed with me longer than I expected. It wasn't anything major, just a normal group conversation, different opinions, different perspectives, nothing unusual. But I noticed something about myself. Every time there was a pause, I felt the need to fill it. Every time someone challenged a point, I responded immediately. Not because I had to, but because I didn't want to lose my position in the conversation. And in doing that, I was actually giving it away. Because while I was reacting, someone else wasn't. They were still not disengaged, not passive, just not pulled into every moment. They listened longer than expected. They didn't rush to respond. They allowed silence to exist without trying to control it. And when they finally spoke, it carried weight. Not because it was louder, not because it was more complex, but because it came from a place that wasn't reactive. That moment changed how I saw everything. Because it made something clear in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. Presence is not built in the moment you speak. It's built in the way you think before you speak. That's the invisible difference. And once you see it, you start to notice it everywhere. You start to see how often people react instead of respond, and how quickly conversations turn into subtle competitions for attention. How easily control is lost, not through big mistakes, but through small, automatic reactions. And on the other side, you start to recognize a completely different pattern. A slower way of thinking, a more deliberate way of engaging, a kind of mental distance that allows someone to stay steady, even when the situation isn't. That's what creates real control. Not controlling others, but controlling yourself in a way that changes how others respond to you. And that shift doesn't require you to say more. It doesn't require you to dominate conversations. It doesn't require you to prove anything. It starts in something much simpler. Your ability to not react immediately. Because in that space between what happens and how you respond, there's a decision. And that decision defines everything that comes after. Now here's where things start to get uncomfortable, because once you recognize this difference, you also start to see how often your own thinking pulls you into reactions you don't even choose. Moments where you speak too quickly, moments where you explain too much, moments where you adjust yourself without realizing why. And those patterns don't come from nowhere. They come from a specific way of thinking, a way of thinking that feels normal, but quietly keeps you in a lower position. And in the next chapter, we're going to break that down. Because once you see those patterns clearly, you'll understand exactly why things haven't been working the way you expected. And more importantly, how to change it. Chapter 2. The thinking pattern that keeps you small. There's a pattern in your thinking that doesn't feel like a problem. It feels normal. It feels like you're being careful, aware, even smart. But in reality, it's quietly keeping you in a smaller position than you need to be. And the reason it's so hard to notice is because it doesn't show up as something obvious. It shows up as reactions, fast ones, automatic ones, the kind that happen before you even realize you've made a choice. You see it in small moments. Someone says something unexpected. You respond immediately. Someone challenges your point. You explain more than you need to. Someone seems uninterested. You adjust your tone, your energy, your approach, just to pull them back in. Nothing about that feels wrong. In fact, it feels like you're doing the right thing. Some trying to handle the situation, trying to keep control. But what's actually happening is something very different. You're not controlling the moment. The moment is controlling you. Because every reaction you make is being triggered by something external. A comment, a look, a shift in tone. And the faster you react, the less control you actually have. This is the core of low-value thinking. Not a lack of intelligence, not a lack of ability, but a lack of space between what happens and how you respond to it. That space is everything. Without it, your thinking becomes tied to whatever is happening around you. And when that happens, you stop choosing your behavior. You start defaulting to it. I remember noticing this in a way that was almost uncomfortable to admit. It wasn't in a big situation. It was something small. A conversation where someone disagreed with me. Not aggressively, not disrespectfully. Just enough to create tension. And without thinking, I started explaining, clarifying, adding more detail, trying to make sure my point was fully understood. But as I was doing it, I could feel something shift. Not in them, in me. The more I explained, the more I felt like I was losing ground. Not because my point was weak, but because my reaction was coming from a place that needed something, needed agreement, needed validation, needed the situation to go a certain way. And the moment you need something from an interaction, you give away control of it. That's the part that isn't obvious at first, because it feels like effort, it feels like engagement, it feels like you're doing what you're supposed to do. But underneath that, there's a subtle dependence, a dependence on how the other person responds, and that dependence shapes everything. Your tone becomes slightly tighter, your timing becomes slightly rushed, your presence becomes slightly unstable. Again, not obvious, but enough for the other person to feel it. And once they feel it, the dynamic shifts. Now compare that to someone who doesn't think that way. Same situation, same disagreement, but instead of reacting immediately, they pause. Not as a tactic, not to look calm, but because their thinking isn't being pulled by the moment. They don't feel the need to fix the tension instantly. They don't feel the need to explain everything. They let the moment exist without trying to control it right away. And that changes everything, because now their response is a choice, not a reaction. And that difference is what people feel. It's what creates that sense of control, even when nothing dramatic is happening. This is where another pattern shows up, one that's even harder to notice, The need to be understood. It sounds harmless, even positive. Of course you want to be understood. Of course you want people to get what you're saying. But when that need becomes too strong, it starts to shape your thinking in ways you don't realize. You begin to over-explain. You repeat yourself in different ways. You adjust your message based on every small reaction you see. Not because you're unclear, but because you're trying to guarantee a certain outcome. And the more you try to guarantee it, the more you lose control of how you're perceived. Because instead of holding your position, you start chasing agreement. And people can feel that, even if they can't explain it. They feel the difference between someone who is grounded in what they're saying and someone who is trying to make sure it lands. That difference is subtle, but powerful. I used to think confidence meant having the right words. Now I see it differently. Confidence is the ability to stay steady, even when the moment doesn't go the way you expect. And that comes from how you think, not how you speak. Because if your thinking is dependent on the situation, your behavior will always adjust to it. And that's what keeps you small, not in an obvious way, but in a consistent one. A pattern where you react instead of choose. You explain instead of state. You adjust instead of hold position. And over time, that pattern becomes your default. It becomes how people experience you, not because they've decided anything about you consciously, but because your thinking has already shaped the interaction before they needed to. Now here's the part that matters most. This pattern doesn't change by forcing yourself to act differently. You can try to speak less, try to be more confident, try to act calm, but if the thinking underneath stays the same, those changes won't hold. Because under pressure, you'll go back to reacting. You'll go back to needing the moment to go a certain way. You'll go back to that subtle dependence that gives your control away. So the real shift has to happen deeper than behavior. It has to happen in how you process what's happening around you, in how you interpret tension, in how you deal with uncertainty, in how you respond when things don't go exactly as expected. That's where high-value thinking begins. Not in what you say, but in what you allow to affect you, before you say anything at all. And once that changes, your reactions slow down. Your responses become intentional. Your presence becomes steady. Not because you're trying to control everything, but because you're no longer being controlled by it. And that's where the real difference starts to show. But to fully understand that, you need to see how high-value individuals actually think in real situations. Because it's not just about avoiding reactions, it's about replacing them with something stronger, something more controlled, something more deliberate. And in the next chapter, we're going to break that down in a way you'll start to recognize immediately. Chapter 3. The Core Way. High-value people think there's a point where everything starts to become clear, not because the world changes, not because people suddenly treat you differently, but because you begin to see situations in a completely different way. The same conversation, the same pressure, the same uncertainty, but your response to it is no longer automatic. That's where high-value thinking actually begins, and it doesn't come from one single idea. It comes from a shift in how you process everything around you. A different filter, a different set of priorities, a different way of deciding what matters and what doesn't. And when you break it down, it usually comes back to 3 core patterns: control, time, and detachment. These aren't techniques. They're ways of thinking that quietly change how you move through every situation. The first is control, but not in the way people usually understand it. This isn't about controlling others or controlling outcomes. It's about something much simpler: understanding what actually belongs to you in any given moment. Because in most situations, there are 2 layers: what's happening and how you respond to it. Everything else is noise. Someone interrupts you, that's what's happening. How you respond, that's yours. Someone disagrees with you, that's what's happening. Whether you react, pause, or stay grounded, that's yours. But when your thinking isn't clear, those two layers get mixed together. You start trying to control the situation itself, trying to manage how others behave, trying to shape the outcome directly. And in doing that, you lose control of the only thing that was ever yours to begin with: your response. High-value thinking separates those two things instantly, not as a conscious effort every time, but as a default way of processing. What part of this is actually mine? That question changes everything, because the moment you stop trying to control what isn't yours, you free up all your attention for what is. Your tone, your timing, your presence. And that creates a kind of stability that people can feel, even if they don't understand it. The second pattern is time. This one is even more subtle, because most reactions are driven by short-term thinking. What feels right in the moment? What resolves tension quickly? What protects your position immediately? That's why reactions happen so fast. They're trying to solve the situation now, but high-value thinking operates differently. It stretches time. Instead of asking, "How do I handle this moment?" it asks, "What does this moment actually mean in the long run?" And that changes your response completely. Someone challenges you. Short-term thinking says, "Respond now, defend your position." Long-term thinking says, "This moment doesn't define anything. I don't need to react instantly." Someone ignores your point. Short-term thinking says, "Say more, get their attention." Long-term thinking says, "If it matters, it will land. If it doesn't, forcing it won't help." That shift creates space. And in that space, your reactions slow down. Your responses become more measured, and you stop being pulled into every small fluctuation in the environment. This is where calm comes from. Not from suppressing emotion, but from seeing beyond the immediate moment. The third pattern is detachment, and this is often misunderstood. Detachment doesn't mean you don't care. It means you're not emotionally controlled by every outcome. There's a difference, because when you're attached to a specific result, you need things to go a certain way. You need agreement. You need validation. You need the situation to confirm something about you. And that need shapes your behavior. It makes you push harder, explain more, react faster. But when you're detached, you can engage fully, without needing the outcome to define you. You can express your point clearly, without needing everyone to agree. You can stay present in the interaction, without being pulled by every reaction. And that creates a kind of quiet confidence. Not the kind that tries to prove itself, but the kind that doesn't need to. I remember the first time I consciously noticed this shift in myself. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a big moment. It was a conversation where I would normally feel the need to explain more, to clarify, to make sure everything was fully understood. But this time, I didn't. Not because I was holding back, but because I didn't feel the need to. I said what I needed to say, and then I let it sit. No extra explanation, no adjustment, no attempt to control how it was received. And something changed, not in what I said, but in how it felt. There was no pressure behind it, no urgency, just clarity. And for the first time, I could feel the difference between reacting and choosing. That's what these three patterns create together. Control gives you stability, time gives you perspective, detachment gives you freedom. And when those three combine, your thinking stops being reactive. It becomes deliberate, and that changes how people experience you. Not because you're trying to be different, but because you are different, at a fundamental level. Now here's where it all connects, because once you start thinking this way, you begin to notice something else. A pattern in how people respond to you. They interrupt less, they listen more, they take what you say more seriously, not because you demanded it, but because your thinking changed the dynamic before anything was said. And that's the part that's easy to miss. Because it doesn't feel like effort. It feels like less effort. Less reacting, less adjusting, less trying to control everything. But more clarity, and more stability, more presence. And over time, that becomes your default. Not something you think about, but something you naturally do. And once that happens, you don't just handle situations differently. You move through them differently. But there's still one piece missing. Because even with this understanding, there are moments where pressure builds, where emotions rise, where the instinct to react comes back. And what you do in those moments is what defines everything. In the next chapter, we're going to look at that exact point. The moment where most people lose control, and why the ones who don't end up with an advantage you can't fake. Chapter 4. The dangerous power of not reacting. There's a moment in almost every situation where everything could go in two completely different directions. And most of the time, that moment is small. So small that you don't even notice it happening. Someone says something slightly disrespectful. A comment lands in a way you didn't expect. A situation shifts, just enough to create tension. And right there, your instinct kicks in. You feel it before you think. The urge to respond, to correct, to explain, to regain control of the moment. It happens fast. So fast that it feels natural. But that moment, that exact point where you feel the need to react, is where most people give away their power. Not in an obvious way, not in a way that looks like a mistake, but in a way that subtly shifts the entire dynamic. Because the moment you react automatically, you're no longer choosing your response. You're being driven by the situation, and people can feel that, even if they can't explain it. I used to think reacting quickly meant I was engaged, present, sharp, on top of things. If something happened, I responded immediately. If someone challenged me, I had an answer ready. If there was tension, I tried to resolve it. It felt like control, but over time, I started to notice something different. The faster I reacted, the less control I actually had. Because every reaction was tied to something external. Something someone said, something someone did, something that shifted outside of me. And without realizing it, I was letting those things decide how I showed up. That's when I began to notice people who operated differently. Now, they weren't slower in a passive way. They weren't disconnected. They were just not reactive. When something happened, they didn't immediately respond. They let it sit, not awkwardly, not artificially, just naturally. And that pause changed everything, because in that space, they weren't being controlled by the moment. They were deciding how to engage with it. That's the difference. Not reacting doesn't mean doing nothing. It means not letting the first impulse decide your behavior. It means creating a gap, a space where you can see what's actually happening before you respond to it. And that space is where control lives. I remember a situation that made this clear in a way I couldn't ignore. It was a conversation that started normally, nothing unusual. But at some point, the tone shifted, and a comment came in that felt slightly dismissive. Not aggressive, but just enough to create pressure. And I felt it immediately. That familiar urge to respond, to correct it, to push back, to make sure my position was clear. And for a second, I almost did. But something stopped me. Not a strategy, not a technique, just awareness. I noticed the impulse, and instead of acting on it, I let it pass. I didn't respond right away. I stayed still, and in that moment, something interesting happened. The tension didn't increase. It didn't explode. It didn't turn into conflict. It shifted. The other person adjusted. The energy changed, and suddenly, the situation didn't require the response I thought it did. That was the moment everything clicked, because I realized the reaction I felt wasn't always necessary. It was automatic. And if I had followed it, I would have created a dynamic that didn't need to exist. That's the hidden cost of reacting. It doesn't just reflect the situation, it shapes it. Every reaction you make changes the direction of the interaction, sometimes in small ways, sometimes in ways you don't even notice until later. But it always has an effect, and when those reactions are automatic, you're shaping situations without actually choosing how. That's why not reacting is so powerful. Because it interrupts that pattern. It gives you a moment to see clearly, to decide whether the situation actually needs a response, or if the response is just coming from habit. And most of the time, it's habit. The habit of needing to correct, the habit of needing to be understood, the habit of needing to maintain a certain position. But when you remove that habit, something else appears. Clarity. You start to see which moments matter and which ones don't, which comments deserve attention, and which ones don't need anything at all, and that changes how people experience you. Because when you don't react to everything, your responses carry more weight. They become intentional, measured, controlled, instead of constant. And people feel that difference. They start paying more attention to what you say, because you don't say something every time. They start respecting your presence, because it doesn't shift with every small change in the environment. That's where real power comes from, not from dominating every interaction, but from choosing when and how you engage. Now here's the part that most people misunderstand. They think this means becoming silent, holding back, not expressing anything. But that's not what this is. This is about control. There's a difference between silence that comes from fear and silence that comes from choice. One feels weak, the other feels grounded, and people can tell the difference immediately. Because controlled silence doesn't feel like hesitation. It feels like presence. It feels like someone who is not rushed, not pulled, not affected by every small shift, and that creates something rare. A sense that this person cannot be easily influenced, that they're not reacting to pressure, that they're not adjusting based on every external signal. And that alone changes the dynamic, because people naturally respect what they can't easily move. But here's where it goes deeper, because once you stop reacting automatically, you begin to notice something else, the signals you send without realizing it, the small behaviors that shape how people see you, the subtle ways your thinking translates into presence. And those signals are often more important than anything you say. In the next chapter, we're going to break that down, because once you understand how those signals work, you'll start to see exactly why people respond to you the way they do, and how to change it without forcing anything at all. Chapter 5. The subtle signals that change how people see you. There's something people notice about you before you say a single word, not consciously, not in a way they can explain, but they feel it, in the way you enter a space, in how you hold yourself, in how you respond or don't respond to what's happening around you. And that feeling shapes everything that comes after. Because people don't just respond to what you say, they respond to what your presence communicates, and most of that communication is happening without words. It's in the small signals, the ones you don't think about, the ones you don't plan, the ones that come directly from how you think. I didn't understand this for a long time. I thought perception was built through communication. Say the right things, present yourself well, make a good impression. But what I started to notice was two people could say almost the same thing and be received completely differently. One would be taken seriously, the other would be questioned, interrupted, or overlooked. And the difference wasn't in the words, it was in the signals behind them. Subtle signals, the kind that don't stand out on their own, but together create a very clear impression. You see it in timing. Someone asks a question, One person answers immediately. Quick, precise, efficient. Another person pauses. Just for a moment. Not because they don't know what to say, but because they're not rushed to respond. That pause changes how the answer feels. It creates weight. It signals control. Now look at eye contact. One person speaks while constantly adjusting based on reactions, watching for approval, and looking for signs that what they're saying is landing. Another person speaks and stays steady. Not aggressive, not intense, just grounded. That difference is subtle, but it completely changes how the message is received. Then there's something even harder to notice: the absence of effort. When someone is trying to be liked, you can feel it, not because they're doing something wrong, but because there's a slight tension in how they show up. They respond quickly. They adjust easily. They try to keep the interaction smooth. And again, none of that looks like a mistake. But it creates a signal that says, I need this interaction to go well. Now compare that to someone who doesn't carry that need. They're still engaged, still present, still aware, but they're not adjusting themselves to control how they're perceived. They're simply there. And that creates a completely different feeling, not louder, not more dominant, just more solid. I remember noticing this in a situation that felt almost too simple to matter. It was a conversation where multiple people were sharing ideas. Nothing intense, just a normal exchange. And I saw two different patterns play out. One person spoke often, added points, built on what others said, kept the conversation moving. Another person spoke less, much less, but every time they did, people listened. Not because they had authority, not because they forced attention, but because their presence didn't feel like it was competing for it. And that changed everything. Because when you're not competing for attention, your words don't feel like noise. They feel intentional. That's the shift. And it doesn't come from learning what to say. It comes from removing the need behind what you say. When your thinking is steady, your signals become steady. You stop over-explaining because you're not trying to make sure you're understood. You stop reacting to every small change because you're not trying to control the outcome. You stop adjusting yourself constantly because you're not trying to be liked in every moment. And all of that changes how people experience you without you forcing anything. That's what makes this so powerful, because these signals can't be faked. You can try to act calm. You can try to speak less. You can try to hold eye contact longer. But if the thinking underneath is still reactive, those signals won't hold. They'll break under pressure. Because real presence isn't a behavior, it's a reflection. It's a reflection of how you process what's happening around you. And people pick up on that instantly, even if they can't explain it. Now here's where it becomes even more interesting. Because once you understand this, you start to notice how often your signals are shaped by something you don't question. The need for approval, it's subtle. It doesn't always feel like insecurity. Sometimes it feels like awareness, like social intelligence, like being considerate. But underneath that, there's a pattern of adjusting yourself based on how others respond. And that pattern creates signals that lower your perceived value without you realizing it. In the next chapter, we're going to break that down, because once you see how the need for approval shapes your thinking, you'll understand why it's so hard to stay steady and what it takes to finally break out of it. Chapter 6. The Trap of Needing Approval. There's a need that feels completely normal. So normal that you rarely question it. The need to be understood. The need to be accepted. The need for people to respond to you in a certain way. It doesn't feel like weakness. It feels like awareness. Like being socially intelligent. Like knowing how to navigate interactions. But underneath that, there's a pattern that quietly shapes how you think. And once you see it clearly, you start to realize how much control it actually has over you. It shows up in small ways. You say something and immediately look for a reaction. You share an idea and wait to see if people agree. You adjust your tone based on how others respond. None of this feels dramatic. It feels subtle, almost automatic. But that's exactly why it's so powerful. Because when your thinking is tied to how others respond, you stop being stable. Your state starts to shift based on external feedback. And once that happens, you're no longer in control of your presence. The environment is. I didn't notice this pattern at first, because it didn't look like insecurity. It looked like effort. It looked like trying to communicate well, trying to connect, trying to make sure things were understood. But over time, I started to see something I couldn't ignore. The more I needed a certain reaction, the less grounded I felt. The more I adjusted myself to get that reaction, the less consistent my presence became. It wasn't obvious, but it was there. In how I spoke, in how I responded, in how quickly I shifted based on what I thought others were thinking. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it, because it explained something I had felt for a long time, but never fully understood. That subtle sense of losing control in certain interactions. Not completely, just enough to feel like something was off. That's the effect of needing approval. It doesn't break your presence, it destabilizes it. And that's enough to change how people experience you. Because when someone feels that your state depends on their response, they naturally take a different position. Not consciously, but instinctively. They feel the imbalance. They feel that you're adjusting while they remain steady. And that alone shifts the dynamic. This is where the real cost shows up, because the more you depend on approval, the more you give away control of the interaction. You start speaking to get a reaction, instead of speaking from clarity. So you start adjusting your message. Instead of holding your position, you start reading every small signal, instead of staying grounded in your own. And over time, that becomes your default, a pattern where your thinking is constantly scanning for feedback, constantly adjusting, constantly reacting. And the more you do that, the harder it becomes to stay steady. I remember a moment where this became very clear. It was a simple conversation, nothing intense. But I noticed something about myself. Every time I made a point, I waited. Not externally, but internally, waiting to see how it would be received, and that waiting changed how I felt in the moment. It created a kind of tension, a subtle dependence on what came next, and the more I paid attention to it, the more obvious it became. I wasn't just expressing my thoughts, and I was monitoring how they were being received, and that changed everything. Because instead of being fully present in what I was saying, part of my attention was always somewhere else, watching, evaluating, adjusting. That's when I realized something simple, but difficult to accept. The need for approval doesn't just affect how you feel, it affects how you think. And once it affects how you think, it affects everything that follows. Your tone, your timing, your decisions, all of it becomes slightly influenced by something external. And that's enough to break your stability. Now compare that to someone who doesn't operate from that need. Same situation, same conversation, but no internal dependence on how it's received. They express their point and let it stand. No immediate adjustment, no subtle correction, no need to shape the reaction. And that creates something very different. Clarity. Not because they're always right, but because they're not trying to control how they're perceived. They're simply expressing what they see and allowing the outcome to be what it is. That's where real confidence comes from, not from being certain of every word, but from not needing those words to be validated. And that changes how people respond to you. Because when you don't need approval, you stop giving people the ability to control your state. You stop reacting to every signal. You stop adjusting based on every response. you become consistent. And consistency is what creates trust in how you're perceived. Not forced confidence, not performance, just stability. Now here's where it becomes uncomfortable, because removing this pattern doesn't happen by trying to act more confident. It happens by letting go of something deeper, the need for every interaction to go a certain way, the need to be seen a certain way, the need to be agreed with, the need to be validated. And that's not easy, because that need is deeply ingrained. It feels like part of how you function. But once you start loosening it, something shifts. You feel less pressure in conversations, less urgency to respond perfectly, less need to control every outcome, and in that space, your thinking becomes clearer. Your responses become more grounded. Your presence becomes more stable. Not because you're trying to be that way, but because there's nothing pulling you out of it anymore. And that's where the real change begins. Because once you're no longer thinking from a place of needing approval, you can start building something much stronger. A way of thinking that doesn't depend on external reactions. A way of thinking that stays steady, even when the situation doesn't. And in the next chapter, we're going to break down exactly how to build that. Not in theory, but in a way you can start applying immediately, in the same situations you're already in. Chapter 7. The mental habits that raise your value. Instantly. At some point, understanding is no longer enough. You can see the patterns. You can recognize when you're reacting. You can even notice the moments where you lose control. But in real situations, everything still happens fast. Too fast to analyze. Too fast to think through step by step. And that's where most people get stuck. Because awareness without new habits doesn't change behavior. Under pressure, you fall back to what's automatic. That's why this shift isn't about knowing more. It's about building a different default, a different way your mind operates, without needing effort in the moment. And that comes down to a few simple habits, not complex strategies, not techniques you have to remember, but just small mental shifts that change how you process situations in real time. The first habit is this: pause before you respond. It sounds simple, almost too simple, but it's one of the most powerful changes you can make, because that pause creates something most people never experience. Space. Space between what happens and how you react to it. And in that space, you're no longer automatic. You're aware. You start to see the situation instead of being pulled into it. You notice the tone, the intent, the actual weight of what was said. And most importantly, you notice your own impulse, that urge to respond quickly, to correct, to explain. And once you see it, you don't have to follow it. That's the shift, not suppressing the reaction, just not acting on it immediately. Even a second of pause changes everything. So your tone becomes calmer, your response becomes clearer, your presence becomes more grounded, and people feel that instantly. The second habit is even more important. Ask yourself one question: what part of this is actually in my control? Because in most situations, you're reacting to things that were never yours to control in the first place. Someone's opinion, someone's tone, someone's reaction, and when your thinking is focused on those things, you lose stability. But the moment you bring your focus back to what is yours, your response changes. Your tone, your timing, your decision to engage or not. That's where control actually exists. And when your thinking is centered there, you stop being pulled in different directions by the environment. You become steady, not because the situation is easy, but because your attention is in the right place. The third habit is subtle, but it changes everything. Reframe the moment. Instead of reacting to what's happening at face value, you shift how you interpret it. Someone interrupts you. Instead of seeing it as disrespect, you see it as information. Information about them, their state, their awareness. And that changes your response. Because now, you're not reacting emotionally. You're observing. Someone disagrees with you. Instead of feeling the need to defend, you see it as a difference in perspective, not a threat to your position. And again, your response changes. This habit removes emotional weight from situations. It creates distance, not detachment from the situation itself, but from the automatic meaning you assign to it. And in that distance, you gain control. Now here's the part that matters most. These habits are simple, but they don't feel natural at first, because your mind is used to speed, used to reacting, used to adjusting quickly, used to trying to control outcomes in real time. So when you start pausing, it feels uncomfortable. When you stop reacting immediately, it feels like you're losing control. When you don't explain everything, it feels like something is missing. That's normal, because you're interrupting a pattern that has been running for a long time. And at first, your mind will try to pull you back into it. But if you stay consistent, something changes. The pause becomes easier, the clarity becomes faster, the need to react becomes weaker, and eventually, it becomes automatic. That's when you know the shift is real. And not when you understand it, but when you start responding differently, without having to think about it. I remember when this started to happen for me. It wasn't in a big moment. It was something small, a situation where I would normally react immediately. And this time, I didn't. Not because I forced myself, but because the impulse wasn't as strong. There was space. And in that space, I chose a different response. Calmer, simpler, more controlled, and the result was completely different. Not because the situation changed, but because I did. That's how this works. You don't change every situation. You change how you move through them, and that changes the outcome naturally. Now here's where it all comes together, because once these habits become part of how you think, something deeper starts to shift. Your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who reacts. You stop feeling the need to control every moment. You stop adjusting yourself constantly based on the environment. And instead, you become someone who is steady, someone who is clear, someone who doesn't lose control under pressure. Not because you're trying to be that person, but because your thinking no longer pulls you out of it. And that's the real transformation. Not what you do, but who you become. And in the final chapter, we're going to bring all of this together. Because there's a point where this is no longer something you practice. It becomes something you are. Chapter 8. Becoming someone others can't easily shake. There's a moment where everything you've understood starts to become something you are. Not perfectly, not all at once, but consistently enough that you begin to notice a difference in how you think, in how you respond, in how you move through situations that used to affect you. And the shift is quiet, so quiet that if you weren't paying attention, you might miss it. But it shows up in small ways. Moments that used to pull you in don't feel as strong. Situations that used to create pressure feel more manageable. Conversations that used to throw you off feel more controlled, not because the world changed, but because you did. You're no longer reacting the same way. You're no longer adjusting yourself constantly. You're no longer depending on how things unfold to stay steady. And that creates something powerful. Stability, not forced, not performed. Real stability. The kind that doesn't disappear when things don't go your way. Because before this, your thinking was tied to the situation. If things went well, you felt in control. If they didn't, something shifted. Your tone changed. Your reactions sped up. Your presence became less consistent. But now, there's distance. Not disconnection. Just enough space between you and what's happening that you can stay grounded. And that's what changes everything. Because once you're no longer easily shaken, people start to experience you differently. Not because you're trying to create an impression, but because your presence no longer fluctuates. You're not reacting to every comment. You're not adjusting to every tone. You're not pulled by every shift in the environment, and that creates something rare, a sense that you're stable, regardless of what's happening. And people trust that. They respond to it. They respect it, even if they don't fully understand why. I remember noticing this change in a way that felt almost unfamiliar. A situation that normally would have affected me. Something unexpected, a shift in tone, a comment that could easily be taken the wrong way. And I felt it. That initial reaction, that impulse to respond. But this time, it didn't take over. It was just there. And then it passed. And in that space, I had a choice, and I chose differently, not dramatically, not in a way that stood out, just more controlled, more intentional. And the moment moved on. No tension, no escalation, no loss of position, just clarity. So that's when it becomes real. Not when you can explain the ideas, but when your reactions no longer control you. Because that's what separates understanding from transformation. Anyone can recognize these patterns, but not everyone changes how they think. And the difference shows. Over time, this becomes your default. You don't have to remind yourself to pause. You don't have to force yourself to stay calm. You don't have to think through every response. Because your mind is no longer wired to react the same way. It's wired to observe first, to process before responding, to stay steady, even when the moment isn't. And that's what makes you difficult to shake. Not in an aggressive way, not in a defensive way, but in a way that feels grounded. And that changes how people interact with you. Because when someone realizes they can't easily influence your state, they stop trying to. When they see that you're not reacting to every signal, they adjust how they engage with you. When they feel that your presence doesn't depend on their response, they take what you say more seriously. Not because you demanded it, but because your thinking created that dynamic before anything was said. That's the real shift. It's not about controlling others. It's about becoming someone who is no longer controlled by the moment. And once you reach that point, something else happens. You stop focusing so much on how you're perceived. You stop trying to manage every interaction. You stop analyzing every response. Because you don't need to anymore. Your thinking is stable. Your presence is consistent. And that consistency does the work for you. That's when things start to feel different. Not forced, not calculated, just natural. You speak when you have something to say. You stay quiet when there's nothing to add. You respond when it matters. You let things pass when they don't, and that simplicity creates clarity for you and for everyone around you. Now here's the final part, because this isn't something you reach once, and then you're done. Situations will still challenge you. Moments will still test your reactions. There will still be times where the old patterns try to come back. That doesn't change. But what changes is your awareness of it, your ability to see it happening and not follow it. And every time you choose differently, you reinforce this new way of thinking. You strengthen it. You make it more natural, until eventually it becomes who you are. Not something you practice, but something you live. And when that happens, you don't just think like a high-value person. You move like one. You respond like one. You exist in a way that doesn't depend on the situation to stay steady. And that's something people can feel before you even say a word. There's something subtle that happens when you start to understand all of this. At first, it feels like information, ideas you recognize, patterns